So we'll get started here. So guys, I'm Joe LaSorsa, CEO of Executive Support and Logistics. It's a new venture from January of this year that I started because I wanted to start up a new brand to kind of go at things a little bit differently than I have been with LaSorsa and Associates. So we really focus on a different model than really what's out there. It's something that we've been working on for a long time, in development for a very long time. And it's something that we're excited to push out here under this new brand, Executive Support and Logistics, or ESL. We have a lot of things that we focus on, obviously, with providing executive protection services. But really what it comes down to is we focus on quality above all else. A relentless focus on the client, making sure that our services match what the client needs, and making sure those services are easy to live with for the client. We focus on continuational operational readiness. So making sure that we're constantly ready. The big thing with providing EP is it's busy, and then we lose the sight of training, and all that kind of falls to the side. So we really focus on operational readiness. We focus on getting the best talent available. So that way, anything that we staff, get the right person for the right job. That's always a challenge, and that's something that we really strongly focus on. And lastly, we innovate. We focus on our proven methods that we've done forever, but we innovate into new things. We call it EP 3.0. I'm excited to offer it for you guys. It's going to be awesome. So really excited to push this out. Recently, I've had Christian West join us as the protection program architect for ESL. So really excited to announce that as well. Christian, if you want to hop on, say hello. If you're ready.
I'm ready. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining in. I'm about as excited as Joe is to both present to all of you, but also be part of this new venture and see where we can take it. Back to you, Joe.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. So I just wanted to do a quick intro since I know ESL is a new brand, and you might have had some questions on it. But really what I get into today is the topic of the webinar, which is communicating with executives. It's something that is an absolute necessity when you're dealing in this world, as we all know, but it's something that we struggle with because, we might be very clear to the point, but maybe we don't have that soft side to it. Maybe we over communicate when we're dealing with clients. Maybe we want to ask all of our questions whenever we have questions to the principal. All of those things need to be considered, and really what it comes down to is we're doing a service for a client to better their lives. So we shouldn't cause any friction with the way that we communicate. It's just as simple as that, guys. So a couple of points here, nothing really fancy, just a couple of main points that are really going to help you when you consider who you talk to, or rather how you talk to these people. And this could be an executive client. This could be a client such as another security company. When you're dealing with another security company, these same tenets are going to apply, and it makes you a better employee or better contractor. It's going to save their time. They're going to appreciate communicating with you if you follow these guidelines. So I'm going to post it in the chat once we're done, the outline of what I'm talking about. But to get right into it, the first thing is consider their time. When you're dealing with executives, they can buy, a lot of executives out there can buy anything that they want. But what they can't buy is time. Famous quote from Warren Buffett. He can buy anything but time. So don't waste their time. Make sure that we're optimizing their schedule as much as possible. That goes along with a couple of things, such as if you need to ask a question, is it appropriate to ask your principal that question, or could you ask somebody else? So that's something that you need to consider, is prioritizing your questions, basically triaging them. Who can handle your questions? And you should start that from bottom to top. So when you talk about a corporate ecosystem, you have the CEO that you might be working for, and say they have an executive assistant. So there's a quick easy example right there. Instead of going to the executive every time, go to that executive assistant if you have a question, or to somebody else, even if it's travel related. If it's somebody that's handling the travel for you, the executive flight office, they can answer a question for you. That way you're not texting, emailing, or calling the executive, your principal, and wasting their time with something that somebody else could answer. So guys, make sure you consider their time. Big point there. That's why it's first. In consideration of their time, when you ask questions, here's a really good tip for you. If you do have to ask somebody who's very busy a question, phrase your question so that it's very easy to answer, right? So not naturally, when we ask a question, we want to, especially if you're A-type like we are, we're giving that person the ability to make a decision. That's what we do, because that's what we would appreciate. And what you want to do, though, is kind of almost give them those potential answers. What I'm trying to say here is, if I ask a question, I'm going to give the potential answers in a 1, 2, or 3, or A, B, C, something like that. And that way they can just text or email back 1 or A or C or whatever it is. But it allows them to answer that very efficiently, so that way they're not having to type out a whole response. Okay, so just understand, whenever you ask a question, how is that person going to have to answer it? And if they have to type out a response to answer that, hey, that might be the case. It might have to happen. But if it can be handled with a, like I just told you, give those options, option 1, 2, or 3. That way they can just write back 1, 2, or 3 and be done with it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Phrase your questions so that they're easy to answer. Okay. Consider their preference as well, their preference of communication. So when I was just saying, email them or text them or call them on the phone, you should know when you're dealing with somebody what they prefer. And that's something to pay attention to. If they are the type of person that texts, or they're the type of person that emails everything, they might be the kind of person like me that hates a phone call out of nowhere, because I might be busy doing a million things and I got to stop and answer a phone call versus answer a text message or email or something like that. So try to match their preferred method of communication. Now that changes, that's situationally dependent. If it's something that needs to be answered, and of course call, but just in general, if you have questions, group them up as well, so that way you're not asking them individual questions here and then here and then here and then here. Try to group up your questions. Think about all the questions that you might be able to ask and who you can ask them to, and consider their time when you phrase those questions. All right. A age-old saying, which is up next, clear, concise, and complete. So your communication should be clear, concise, and complete. So think about that for a second. When you write a message, read it slowly to yourself, and that way, and read it out loud even, or if not aloud, just kind of mumble it. That way you have to read every word, and that way it avoids errors, but then also has the appropriate flow that you're going for. So that way it makes sense. And you might think of something else that you might need to add if you read it that way. Okay. As you're reading it, think about what words you can take out that aren't required in that message. If you're typing an email or a text message, we tend to, did I go silent? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys still hear me, or did I go silent?
Yeah, you're good to go. You're fine.
All right. Sorry, someone said they couldn't hear me. All right. Killing me there, Sean. So guys, consider every word. When you type in a word to an email or a text message, just think about, does that really need to have to be said? There's a lot of fluffer words that we use when we try to write nicely. And that's why I'm bringing this point up, is because when you're communicating with an executive, you might be trying to write in a more, formal way, which is a good thing. But when you write in a formal way, you tend to add words, and it just makes it more verbose, waste more of their time. So actually, most of these points go back to consider their time. When I say limit the words that you don't need, make sure it is complete and that it has the context that it needs in order to, be an effective message. Understand this might be the only thing that you're communicating to that person about, but they are communicating with dozens and maybe hundreds of people in a day. Maybe hundreds of people in a day. So just keep that in mind. You're dealing with one person, they're dealing with literally hundreds. So when you're writing an answer, or rather writing a question, they can't give an answer without that context. So while it's kind of a double-edged sword here, you want to limit your words, but you want to have the context in that message, so that way they don't have to try to figure out what you're talking about. They know what you're talking about, and you're giving them the answers they need, or rather the information they need to make those answers. Okay, guys? So understand, the way I think about it is act like you're writing to somebody that has a very bad short-term memory. So when you write them something, even if you just talked about it, you reference the context of it. And that way it gets them in that frame of mind. They might be thinking about 10 things at once. So if you ask them a question, they're not going to know what you're talking about. If you say, hey, remember what we talked about? What do you think? No, they don't remember, and they're not going to want to remember. They're not going to take the time to remember. So just keep that in mind, include that context. Another trick when you write a message is to anticipate the responses that come from that. I'll give a prime example. I brought this up in my last class because I had a student team operating during the field training exercise, and there's a potential threat operating in town. And I said, if you run into that threat, I want to know about it. So that student team sent me a message saying we made contact with the threat. And that's it. They just said we made contact with the threat. So I let it go a couple of minutes and there was nothing else. So if you write something like to your boss, like you're writing back to the GSOC, hey, we made contact with the threat. What is the anticipated questions that are going to follow that, right? Obviously, is everything okay? Did the principal, get upset about it? Did they get touched? You want to know a million things, right? So maybe when you write that message, we made contact with the with the threat. So then you write in, yeah, P's okay, we're all good, we're still moving, and you write in what's next. And then you say more to follow, something like that. But just understand that immediate question that's going to come. You can typically, if you use this trick, just think about it. What is that person going to ask you based on that message? Try to answer that in your message, okay? Quick point too, when I'm thinking about the last class is when you consider their time, when you send a message, consider sending something like screenshots versus a file to, like, say, for example, if you both have iPhones. I'm going to show you this example here, actually. So here is, I'm going to put it in the chat. Let's see if it works. That didn't work. Let me see if I can grab this. I'm going to put this in the chat. Now, what you'll see here, actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is just share my screen for a second. So I know that's not going to work right now. So all right, that's not going to work right now. So 1 second. All right. So what I'm saying here is when you send a message to a client, look at this real quick. I just put it in the chat. If you guys look at that picture, it's still coming through. And there you go. All right. So when you look at that picture, on the left of that picture is the draft that the student sent to the client, in this case during the field training exercise. And it's a great message, very clear, concise, complete. And they included 3 files. And notice they're titled file blank, file blank, file blank. And what does that require you to do? If you are that executive, this isn't a big deal, but this is what I'm talking about here. If you just take these in mind, it will help you consider their time. What does that take you? If you look at that message and you look at the left side of it, you're an executive, you're answering hundreds of emails a day, you're answering dozens of phone calls a day, hundreds of text messages a day, and you get that. You're probably not even going to open those files. You're not even going to click on them. 1, because they're pretty much trained not to open up files that they don't know what they are. And then 2 is it takes more effort. That takes 6 clicks to click in and click out of it, each one of those, versus just being able to see them. So if you look on the right, what I had them resend was a screenshot of each one. So that way it's the message, that text message, and then a screenshot of the student's bios and the vehicle information sheet. So you can see that on that right side there. So now, 1, they can see it almost right away. And if they want to read it, if they want the finer details, they can click it and read it, which they're not likely to do right when they land anyway. But if you see my point here, it's so much easier to digest that information rapidly when it's a screenshot presented in the text message versus a file that's attached in the text message. And last point on this before I move on is label your documents correctly. So imagine if he had sent those and it said something like Adrian's bio, Aaron's bio, suburban information, something like that, that way, at least when they see those, they know what they are versus some random file name or some random, what I get, this is my favorite one, is how many resumes do you think I get a year that are titled my resume, right? So make sure you title your documents correctly, because it might be your resume, but it's one of thousands in my file that are titled My Resume. And I'm not going to go trying to figure out which one's yours. I don't have the time to click on 1,000 files to figure out which one's yours. So put your name on it. So that way it's, Keith Ortiz's resume. I'm just saying that, Keith, because I see it. So, so that way it's up front right there. So make sure you label your files correctly. Okay. And last point I wanted to make here was try to avoid the military terms when you're communicating. A lot of the copy, Roger, even down to yes sir, yes ma'am, that can come across the wrong way. Okay, so just understand that you want to try to avoid those military terms as much as possible. Plain speak, nice speak, it is going to be the best thing. And just consider that. I like what Christian said here. Sharing in a bullet point communication format is key. That's absolutely critical as well. I like that because the information should be easily digestible with headings and even like bolded headings so they stand out. So that way, you can see what's going on and again, digest the information a lot more rapidly than if it's just a big paragraph of plain text. Okay. So, in some guys, the biggest thing I can tell you is consider their time. Consider their time. Don't ask questions you don't need to ask them. If you're going to ask them questions, make them easy to respond to. Ask somebody else if you can get that answer from them. Okay. When you phrase your questions, try to group them up and make them easy to answer with options A, B, C, or D, or 1, 2, 3, or whatever. Make sure, like Christian said, they're bulleted out. That's a great thing. And make sure you have all the information that you need, but nothing that you don't. Okay. So it sounds simple. It's pretty complicated actually, but it's something that I think if you pay attention to these points as I presented them to you, you'll really see a benefit here, and so will your clients. Okay. So if you guys have any questions, you can post them up in the chat. Christian, if you want to chime in with anything, I'm sure you got some points to offer with that.
I do actually. There's a couple of things that I've learned over the years, and that is that I like to categorize my questions a little bit because Joe says be aware of their time, which is absolutely true. But you should also be aware of their program and the time of the day, right? Some questions are very important because it's about what we're doing right now. So of course, if you have to shoot those questions, you shoot them so they have time to answer. But if you're on a longer trip or you work with the same principles or whatever, you might have questions that is for the next day or for later in the day, and then you might not need an answer right now. So it's important that you kind of figure that out and you categorize the questions so you shoot them at the right time. And I usually tell people, if you sit down and you tackle an agenda kind of in a pre-advanced way and you look at the agenda, there's a lot of stuff that you can see that you already know, but there's probably something on the agenda that you don't know. And if you don't know it, make your questions ready when you go and do the advanced work, so you can ask the people that work with the principal already early on, right? So you don't have to go back and forth 5, 6 times. If you already know that you have to ask questions, write them down ahead of time. And a true story from one of my experiences, I used to work for this one CEO that every morning would come down after we've had a 14, 15-hour day, and he would look at me and go like, Christian, what did you do last night? I answered 100 emails. And I always thought to myself, he's full of shit, right? Because there's no way he can answer 100 emails when he comes to his hotel room at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and we're back up at 5 or 7 for a run in the morning. But he did. And one day when he sent me up to look at or pick up his computer, I kind of figured out how this guy answered emails. And I've never gotten an email from the boss, right? But I saw that most of his emails were answered with yes, no, talk to this person, absolutely, really short formats. So when we came back from this trip, I actually set up a meeting with his assistant that set up a course for us on how to communicate with the principal, because they had a fully preset way that everybody in this company were instructed to write emails to the boss if they wanted answers, but nobody had put us on that list because they didn't think that we needed that, right? But it was one of those things we would have totally missed. So I think that's important. The last thing I kind of want to touch on, Joe, is the whole thing about if you give people options, there's a big chance that they're going to pick those options. If you don't give them options when you answer the questions, they might throw a fastball at you or a curveball that you didn't expect, right? Because they have to make up an answer. I'm not saying that it always works, but if they have 1, 2, or 3 options, chances are that they're going to pick one of those options, and then you're way better off, right? Because sometimes when you do your advance, or if you're on the detail, you would like to lead them in a certain way. And by asking these questions the right way, there's a big chance they're going to go that way. So I think that's probably the points that I have, Joe, that I wanted to add in here. So back to you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. All right, so good stuff, guys. I wanted to make this point here as a initial webinar that we're going to do. We're going to be doing more of these as we can. This is something that's come up a lot. This is something that I see a lot of people struggling with. That's something that you're never going to be good at it because every client is different. So you're good enough at it, I should say. You're never going to be good enough at it because every client is different. And so you're gonna have to keep this process, and that's why I wrote these considerations as I did. So that way, you consider their time, consider their preference, clear, concise, complete, right? Make sure you use labels, and in general, avoid military terms. Those are the big points that I could say in general. If you apply those, you'll get on the right track. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Hope it was helpful for you. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and chime it in now, or you can throw it in the chat. And if not, we'll see you next time. We appreciate you coming out. This was a good turnout for our first one. So appreciate you guys. Thanks.